Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach, always available too at carolthecoach.com.
Now I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I am married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
Oh, the very interesting question of, do you want to change that about yourself? Hi, I'm Carol the Coach, and when you talk about sexual addiction, you almost have to be sick and tired of the life that you've created. And when you are sick and tired of that life, well, I'm here to tell you that's when recovery can occur and your life can get better forever. But you have to work the steps. You have to know what to do. You have to have the proper recovery tools in place, and you have to work it. Although it's not easy, it will make you the best person you could possibly be. And, that's not a bad deal. When there's so much shame and self-blame and loathing, and then all of a sudden you start working a program where you feel good about yourself, where you're contributing, where you feel like you are making a difference, not only in your own life, but in the life of others. That is what sexual addiction recovery is all about. And if you've been listening to this show, we talk about everything that really can make a difference in your life and educate you. And the reason that we do that is because there's not enough information disseminated to you through the radio or in television. I know you may have watched Intervention with Dr. Drew, and from time to time he does sexual addiction interventions, and they're really pretty good, I have to admit. There's always some exploitation that occurs whenever you do television, but truly, he gets to some of the heart of the problem. But addiction can show up in so many different forms, from eating disorders and love addiction and gambling and gaming and sex addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism, you name it, people can suffer from it. Now, tonight, I'm really excited. We've never had an expert on the show to talk about gaming addiction. And I actually am going to be working with Hilarie Cash. We're going to be talking with her about her center, Restart. And Restart is a gaming addiction center. I'm sure they treat a lot of different things, but when I think of Restart, I think about some clients that I've actually had at that center that were addicted to gaming. So if you have kids that you're really pretty concerned about, you know how tough it is to child rear in today's world when you're stretched in so many different ways. And on top of it, you're challenged by today's technological world. Digital media is tough to supervise. And Hilarie Cash runs a recovery program for individuals who are addicted to gaming and other digital medias. So she wants to talk to you if you have kids that you're concerned about. And certainly the referrals that I have made were grown adults that were into gaming or into the secret fantasy world of games. Dungeons and Dragons, Warlords, all sorts of games where they got to be in roles and connect with other people and run societies and create fantasy worlds that felt really real. And hence, they became very obsessive-compulsive in their use. So we're going to be talking to her about that, and, that is a wonderful opportunity for you to send me emails to carolthecoach@AOL.com and ask me questions. I'll feel free to ask Hilarie. I have been taking less and less questions on this show, and partially because, I got to tell you, there are some unusual men and women that call the show, and they don't always ask the right questions. It's like they're looking for 3 minutes of fame. And so I don't have a screener on this show. In the last 3 radio shows I worked, I had a screener, took the calls, verified the numbers, got the names, that kind of stuff. But I do it all myself. So feel free. You can give me a call at 646-595-3284 or email me your question to carolthecoach@AOL.com, and I will be happy to ask Hilarie what you might want to know. Because let's face it, how often do you get to talk to somebody who is really an expert in this field? It's very, very rare. And I can really appreciate how tough it is for you if you have concerns about your child to know what to do. So feel free. This is your opportunity to send me questions to carolthecoach@AOL.com. Now, I talk about every type of addiction, but sexual addiction is really the expertise that I have to share with my listeners. And we've talked about all sorts of ways that you can work on recovery. And the interesting thing about recovery is that it requires that you do one of 3 things. And if you've been in addiction programs, you've probably heard about it. You need to talk, you need to trust, and you need to feel. And that's why we talk about feelings all falling under the famous 5: anger, sadness, loneliness, fear, and happiness. And trusting can be very, very difficult. Because let's face it, when you trust, you're opening yourself up to be vulnerable. And sometimes people that suffer from any kind of obsessive-compulsive behavior, well, they've been traumatized on some level, and so they don't trust. But we also know as certified sexual addictions therapists that clearly not everybody has been in that situation. As a matter of fact, some people have just developed habit disorders, obsessive-compulsive behaviors because. And so you have to ask yourself, if you suffer from a sexual addiction, have you been through any trauma? If you have, you're less likely to talk, trust, and feel. Because early on as a child or a young adult, you learned that was not a safe thing to do. And clearly, I get that. I get that it's very tough. That makes therapy hard because it's hard to trust the therapist. It's hard to talk about yourself, and it's hard to share feelings. I'd have to say that most people in therapy have trouble identifying their feelings. So that's not exclusive to sexual addiction. That could be anybody. And when that happens, then you start out simple. You know, you have to be able to identify how you're feeling on a daily basis. So just sitting there right now, how do you feel today? You know, I was telling my group earlier this evening that I had a really rough weekend. Now, rough for me is not that rough, and I understand that, but my internet went down, my phone service went off, my furnace died, and it was a cold snap here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Okay, I just felt like everything was going wrong. So what did I do? You know, other than the practicalities of calling Comcast and finding out they couldn't come out till today, which was yesterday, so I had to wait 24 hours. And the furnace people couldn't figure out what was going on with the furnace. And so I'm literally, you know, in gloves and scarves and thinking about where I can stay. I just decided, okay, I'm going to make this the best day that I can. And I said, I'm going to call a friend, see if I can go over. I'm going to actually light this box that illuminates with positive messages. And this week happens to be my birthday. So I light this box up that says happy birthday. Well, my husband comes down and he says, you know, what is the birthday box on for? Your birthday isn't until Friday. And I said, I am in a bad mood. I feel like nothing is going right now. And I'm raising my vibrational energy. And he kind of laughed, but he knew what I meant, because when I think about my birthday, I get happy. It does raise my vibrational energy. So that's how I worked it. I put that box on, and then I thought it was warmer outside in the sun than it was in my own home, so I went for a blade. And, you know, at first I thought it was really warm, but then I came back and got some extra layers on, and I worked out some of that anxious energy, because what do when you're anxious? You exercise. You physicalize the energy. You make it so that you actually come back and you've exuded all that energy and you feel much more relaxed. So I raised my vibrational energy. I physicalized it. And then in actuality, I had to work a few hours yesterday on a Sunday, believe it or not. Now, some of you could say, wow, working on a Sunday is really a drag. But here's the deal. I'm in private practice. I'm taking some time off later in the month. I feel so much gratitude that I can work and make up some of those hours and not take the hit of not working. So I tried to maintain a positive attitude. And whenever you focus on gratitude, you focus on what's working as opposed to what isn't, you have a better chance of being happier and healthier, and you won't feel so much like a victim. And when you don't feel like a victim, you can function better. So that's the deal. That's what I did. Now, those sound like simple tools, but it is something that you need to apply to yourself. If you're a partner of a sex addict and you feel like your entire life has crumbled, well, then what do you need to do? You absolutely need to take your life in your own hands and make it your own. And I realize that some of you have had some really tough situations, but I know that you can make it work if you apply some of those tools, like positive self-talk, self-affirmations, focusing on gratitude, calling the fellowship, going to a 12-step meeting. You know the drill. You know what the recovery tools are. This is Carol the Coach. This is Sex Help with Carol the Coach. And welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Are you talking to me?
I sure am. Is this Hilarie?
It is. Hi.
I'm sorry. We've got kind of a bad connection. If you could speak up just a little bit.
Would you like me to call back and see if we can get a better connection?
Let me see if I can bump this up and see if we can't give you some volume here.
Okay.
How does that sound?
It sounds fine from my end.
Oh, excellent. Well, Hilarie, welcome to the show. I have wanted to have you on for many, many, many months, so I'm so glad to be talking with you tonight.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, we have shared clients in the past, and I do believe you're one of the few gaming centers in the United States. Is that not correct?
Well, we are the first place to start, and I actually know of only one other place, and that's a hospital that has a program, some award set aside for gamers. That, this country is kind of behind the curve on that one.
Well, I get that. And can you share with our listening audience, how did you get started in this field, and why did you make it your passion?
Well, it was exactly 20 years ago that I opened my private practice when I moved up to Seattle, and one of my very first clients was a young man of 25 who was a gamer, but I didn't know that when he came in. He came in because he was depressed and his marriage was falling apart. Of course, of working with him, what I began to understand is that he was addicted to the video game that he played, which was a multiplayer game without graphics, but nonetheless, he was classically addicted. And it piqued my interest because back in 1994, I didn't own a computer. I didn't know much about the Internet. He opened my eyes to a whole world that was new to me. And then other clients started coming in, and the common variable was the Internet. It was kind of the delivery system for the drug that had taken control of them. And I had a young child at the time, and I just wanted to protect him, so I wanted to learn all I could about it. And I realized almost nobody, there were just a few people back in those early days of the mid-'90s who seemed to be kind of aware of it and were talking about it, doing research and so forth. So I've just been at this a long time.
You sure have. And I love it when a client can not only teach us how to work with them, but also expose us to something that's new and very needed. And certainly gaming is a topic that so many of the parents that I work with come in with concerns. They don't know how much is too much. They don't know how to stop it or to limit it. They don't know how to curb it when kids are hiding their stuff. So tonight, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your beliefs. What are the effects of too early and too much digital media on children?
The effects can be pretty devastating. We are seeing more and more children being handed digital media younger and younger. So it was shocking to me when somebody sent me an image that they'd gotten from off of Amazon for the iPotty. Here was a potty chair for doing potty training, and it had an iPad attached to it. So parents are handing these devices to their children when they're just, not even 1 year old. And I think this is a really tremendous mistake, because the research that people are doing is showing that the more time kids are spending in front of screens, the more it's having a deleterious effect on all kinds of development, on their vocabulary, on their physical movement, on their attachment to others. So there are many realms which screens interfere with in terms of child development.
That makes a lot of sense. And so when you notice effects of kids that are overly involved and enmeshed with digital media, how do you think it affects, for instance, their physical growth?
Well, nature has designed us to, when we're children, to want to explore our world and, to want to move, to want to run, to want to tumble, to want to climb and explore. But screens are mesmerizing, and so screens will steal a child's attention, and that will trump that natural instinct to be moving and exploring and running and developing physical skills and strength. So what we are seeing are more and more children who actually, their brains aren't wired for physical activity. They're less coordinated. They're not interested in being physically active. It's like that natural instinct gets overridden and the window starts to close. And once that window closes, you've got a kid who is wired to be sedentary. And it can be very, very hard to ever overcome that. So that's one effect, is just a very sedentary lifestyle and a child who is not exploring their physical universe and developing in the physical ways that they can develop when they are physically active. Another is the interference with sleep. The guys, by the time the guys get to me that we work with out at our retreat center called Restart, they are chronically sleep deprived because their sleep schedules are topsy-turvy and they just haven't been getting much sleep. And we know that the light from the screens, when kids are staring at screens, and adults too, it interferes with the rise of melatonin in the system, that hormone that makes us actually feel sleepy and want to go to sleep. So children can start being very sleep deprived. And also children often will lose appetite or just eat very poorly. So those are some of the ways. Oh, also carpal tunnel syndrome, just a strain on the tendons of thumb, in particular thumb. I actually was astonished to hear from a physician who is very interested in this whole field and is doing research. He works for the Navy. His name is Andrew Doan, D-O-A-N. And folks listening might be interested to go to YouTube and listen to some of his talks. But he actually literally learned of a client in the Navy who had managed to sever the tendon on I don't remember if it was one or both thumbs, from the repetitive action back and forth and that tendon riding over bone. He did not even realize, because he was so caught up in the game that the game really acted as an analgesic, and he didn't feel the pain of this tendon. So we have that situation happening. Your audience may have heard of people in other countries, but I know it happens here. It may not hit the news, though, who actually literally will die because they are spending 50-plus hours almost without moving as they play the game, and either their hearts just give out because their systems are dehydrated and lack of sleep and everything, or they develop a blood clot because of lack of physical movement. So those are just some of the possibilities of what can happen when some of the physical effects.
Well, no kidding. And, it must be hard, I would think, for our listeners to imagine that this kind of gaming would be this hypnotic to actually keep people from putting fluids into their body. But clearly you're seeing that in other countries, and what we know to be true is if it happens over there, it'll happen over here. So what do parents need to watch for? I mean, what are the signs? Lack of sleep, lack of appetite, not really being interested in doing anything, not being physical, and let's face it, more and more kids are not being physical in general, let alone the ones that are truly coming home and immediately doing their games.
Right.
Anything else that parents need?
Well, so I think in general it is really helpful if parents think in terms of what is it that children really do need. First and foremost, they need to attach to their caregivers. And that's the most important goal of the first few years of life, is a really strong attachment bond, because that regulates children emotionally and physiologically and sets a strong groundwork for everything psychological in the future and relationally for these kids as they grow up. Now, if parents themselves are spending too much time with screens and not spending enough time paying positive attention to their children, then they are already disrupting. That alone will disrupt attachment. And if they are allowing kids to be mesmerized by screens, then that can disrupt the social interaction that needs to take place, the loving, safe interaction that needs to take place between caregiver and child. So that's the first task, and screens can most definitely interfere with that task. Kids can get attached to screens rather than attached to people. So kids need attachment. Kids need a lot of verbal interaction in order to develop language well and develop a good vocabulary. And that happens through, the interaction with caregivers. When screens are on in the background, or kids are in front of screens, or parents are in front of screens, it is distracting, and it interferes with that child's ability to really develop good vocabulary. There's a researcher here at the University of Washington, Christakis is his name, and he has demonstrated through his research that the more time kids spend in front of screens, the more their vocabulary development is retarded compared to their peers who are not spending time with screens. So that would be something else. Kids need lots and lots of physical activity, lots and lots of physical affection, and time with their peers, time for imaginative play. So think of screens as something which in young children, no child under the age of 2 should be exposed to screens of any sort, and even the American Medical Association agrees with us. After the age of 2, if you're going to let children have screen time, it should really not be any more than an hour, 2 hours absolute maximum, and not an interactive screen. And if you can stick to that time limit, that's going to allow for all this other developmental stuff to just occur. The screen won't interfere. Interactive screens should not be introduced to children until they're much, much older, well into elementary school. And I would recommend against any video games being introduced to young children, even in elementary school. Ideally, I would say to parents, wait until a child is at least a teenager before they have video games to play with, because video games are absolutely so powerful in their effects on kids that unless the child has some maturity, they can get hooked immediately.
And what do you think it is, besides perhaps a parent not attaching the way he or she should with the child, what do you think sets up a child's need to be so engrossed in something interactive, like video games?
Well, I think that the way to think about it is that there's the pleasure pathways of the brain are stimulated by the things we do that are pleasurable, and we're designed by nature so that we will keep doing the things that are pleasurable. And when we find something that will really stimulate those centers and give us just a very great amount of pleasure, and we can keep doing it, that's the thing to which we can become addicted. So actually, in my explanation of sort of this neurobiology, I've lost track of your question.
No, I was asking, other than lack of attachment from parents, if you're deprived from physical contact with a significant other, if you're not getting stimulated and encouraged by your parent, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're drinking, maybe they're involved in some other addiction. I know that sets a child up to look for fantasy, and fantasy can occur in gaming at a young age.
Right.
So I wondered, were there other setup triggers that help to predispose a child to this kind of habitual, obsessive-compulsive behavior?
Right. Okay. Now I'm clearer about your question, and it's a great and important question. There definitely are things that predispose any child toward addiction, and we know that some kids are predisposed that way just genetically. We know that modeling from parents is going to influence kids. We know that mental illness is going to predispose some kids toward this addiction in particular. And dysfunctional family dynamics. All of these are things which will predispose children, make them more vulnerable to seeking escape from what are painful situations and conditions. Some of the mental health disorders that we see showing up with this are attention deficit disorder seems to be a disorder which really, because it is a disorder of attention, and kids with ADD tend to have short attention span, and they are seeking stimulation. Video games very much sort of work well with how their brains are wired, how their brains work. So kids with ADD are predisposed to video game addiction and internet addiction more generally, but also a kid who maybe doesn't have that predisposition but has been on the internet and playing video games since an early age, that is a kid who may end up looking like he or she has ADD because the brain has been wired for short attention span too. So that gets a little complicated, trying to discern which came first. Children who are on the autism spectrum and don't know how to read social cues well, find the social world very anxiety-provoking. Those are children who will find comfort and safety behind a screen and would prefer to socialize through the internet rather than socializing face-to-face. And so that's a child who's very vulnerable to this. Again, like with ADD, though, children who are spending a tremendous amount of time in front of screens from an early age may not develop good social skills and may end up looking like they have Asperger's or, high-functioning autism because they're just plain old lacking in social skills. Kids who have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, those children who are depressed, these are all things which children may drive children to seek escape in something that is handy, very convenient, and available to them, which is, computer technology. It's all around us.
That makes a lot of sense. If you have a child who has some social delays, certainly they can excel in something like gaming. I'm sure that it boosts their own sense of self, even though it really greatly interferes with their social functioning. And I can understand where if you have a mental health problem, if you've got attention deficit disorder with or without the hyperactivity, or you're in the autistic field spectrum, that it would really provide a safe way to interact, less fear of rejection. So my guess is you would tell parents that they really need to increase what the child isn't getting in the real world. So what kind of social recommendations would you make for a parent who has a child that would just prefer to stay home, game all evening long, all summer long, and not get out there and meet the neighbors or have a friend spend the night or be part of a club?
I think it's important that parents, if they think they have a child who is on the autism spectrum, to have that assessed, as early as they suspect that. And if the child, if the assessment comes back that, yes, your kid is on the spectrum, that's a child who is going to need some special services. They really should get into social skill building, sort of remedial groups. And so I would say an assessment would be a really good idea. If you suspect that or any other mental health condition, have an assessment done. I think for an awful lot of kids, just limiting or getting rid of the computer for any but the most rudimentary and necessary schoolwork, and essentially saying, I'll support your interests in whatever way I can. I just want you to go out into the world, explore it, find out what you like, get to know people. I'm here to help facilitate all of that in every way I can, is often the best way to go. And kids, remember that just childhood alone for an awful lot of kids is anxiety-provoking. Maybe they feel bad about the way they look, and kids just tend to be insecure. So maybe they often, especially as teenagers, they feel just insecure. And so saying, I will not allow you to run away from the challenge of growing up by hiding behind a screen. I will support you in your efforts to gain friends, learn skills, develop hobbies. And, I want to, I hope that you will also participate in fun family activities. I'll put my screens away and make time for you in the evening. Let's play some family games together at the table, some tabletop games. Let's cook together. So you, as a parent, want to create as many opportunities as you can to develop really nice, loving relationship with your kids, and just support them in every way you can think of to move into the world, the social world and the physical world, and away from the screen. And even if that really means that everybody in the household sticks by some pretty strict rules about screen time, when it's dinner time, there are no screens at all, and we don't even answer the phones. Those are all put away. When it's sleep time, everything goes away an hour before bedtime. Put monitoring software if need be to make sure your kids are following the rules. And if you need to be really strict about it, you can just say, I'll take the computer out for you to get your schoolwork done. I'll monitor what you do to make sure you stick to the rules. And if you're not sticking to the rules, the computer goes away entirely, and you can use the computer at the school library if necessary, or at the public library if necessary. That's the extreme that a parent may need to go to. Parents need to be willing to go as far as possible.
I work with so many parents who take the phone away, take the games away, take the Xbox away, take the computer away, and the children figure out, okay, if I get up at 4 a.m, I can get on the laptop and I can continue my gaming, or I can take that phone into bed with me. I mean, it really is such an obsession that you have to outsmart your child.
Yes, you really do have to outsmart your child. So you can make sure that all digital devices are in your bedroom, locked up in your bedroom every night. If necessary, yes. You really have to be vigilant and make sure that I am actually a firm believer in putting monitoring software on all smartphones and all computers. Things that will send a report.
So when you say that, what monitoring software would you advise?
I particularly like a program called Spectre Pro, and it's developed by a company called Spectre Soft. They also make another program called eBlaster, and I have just found over the years that these have worked pretty well. eBlaster will send a report to a parent or a therapist about, and that report will show where the child, where the individual has gone, how much time they spent there. And it can be set up, it shouldn't be set up by the child, it should be set up by somebody else. And that somebody else should be the administrator for it. The Spectre Pro I like a lot because it will actually take a screenshot every 3 seconds, I think it is, and you, the parent, can go in and just maybe, randomly, not necessarily every day, but just randomly, go in there and view what has happened over the course of that day. Where did the kid go? And, of course, if you're in the midst of a battle with your kid over this, you probably have to monitor it every day. And you will be able to see if and again, it will also describe where the child went, how much time they spent there, and you may not recognize the names of those websites, but by viewing those screenshots like a video and just running through it pretty quickly, you'll just have it. You'll catch pornography if it's pornography showing up, or video games, or other sites that you may have said these are off limits to you. So that's stuff I really like.
Hilarie, do you see a correlation between children who game and children who might look at pornography?
I do. The average age of exposure to porn now is about 10, and I know lots of kids who are being exposed much earlier than 10. And they often come across it accidentally. Pornographers are very skillful at creating websites that sort of capture kids or anyone's attention. So I don't know if it's still that way, but WhiteHouse.com was a porn site. NASA, NASA, NASA.com porn site, rather than .gov.
Mm-hmm.
So kids, it's easy for kids to stumble across porn, and when they're really young, they can be shocking and disturbing, but also very titillating. And then they go back and they're curious and they want to see more, and because it's sexually stimulating and arousing, pretty soon they can go back to it obsessively. And then you've got the beginnings of what will become a sexual addiction. Really there's that danger is mounting that's actually going to be what happens. What I see is that gamers, so the way I think about it is that as children's hormones are rising, of course they're curious about sexuality. They may start looking for porn, or they'll stumble across it. They'll be really interested in it. If you, the parent, don't have filtering software and monitoring software, you're going to have a kid who is very likely, especially a boy, very, very likely to start looking at a lot of porn. And so you need to have a rule about that, and you need to have a way of checking to see if those rules are being followed or not. If that doesn't happen, if the child really does pursue pornography, then what I see are two things that happen. Either the child starts asking girls that he encounters at school to do to him what he's been watching in pornography, and so he's been sexualized, and now he wants to do the kind of hookup sex that he's been watching, or he just decides, what's easiest for me is to just masturbate to porn and forget trying to get to know girls and learn how to, or whoever I'm attracted to, forget trying to develop the skills that it takes to go down that normal developmental path, which is what the teenage years, so much of what the teenage years are about. Learning how to flirt, learning how to date, eventually learning how to be sexually active with somebody that you have a relationship with. But all of that takes a lot of skill, takes time to develop, and guys are getting pulled off that track in large numbers, I think. Yeah.
I am talking with Hilarie Cash, who is the director of Restart Center, and if people are interested in finding out more about your center or the services that you offer, they can actually go to www.netaddictionrecovery.com, or they can contact you at Hilarie.Cash, and that's Hilarie.Cash at restartlife.com. Let me ask you, because you've given us a lot of good information, tell me a little bit about the Restart Center.
Well, we started it over 5 years ago, and it's something that I had really wanted to start 15 years ago, but I didn't have the wherewithal to do it because I understood that what was needed for these young men in particular was a place where they could really just detox from technology. And when I met Cosette Ray and her husband Gary Simmons about almost 6 years ago now, in the spring it will be 6 years, and we understood one another. We understood that the need was out there for such a place, and they had a lovely house that on the property that they had outgrown, or it had outgrown them really, because their kids were now grown and gone. And so we decided to just use this property for Restart. And so it's a large house on 5 very beautiful acres out in the country near Seattle. It's about 40 minutes from Seattle. And we have 2 phases to the program. The first phase is 45 to 90 days, and it's the detox phase. And our goals for phase 1 are just keep them away from technology long enough for them to detox, which in our experience, that first really intense physical withdrawal finishes after about 3 weeks or so. Support them while they complete what we call the Life Balance Plan, which is a detailed document where they kind of think through and write down what their goals are going forward and how are they going to reintegrate computers into their lives, but now in a healthy way. And goal 3 is a focus on physical health because, as I was saying before, they come in kind of malnourished, sleep-deprived, physically inactive. So we have a fitness portion of the program 5 days a week. They eat healthy. They have a regular sleeping schedule. And then skill building. Our focus is very much on skill building. They don't know how to regulate their emotional states. They often are lacking social skills, self-care skills and habits, and sometimes just very rudimentary life skills like, how do you do your laundry and how do you cook food for a group of people and even for yourself and so forth. So, and then we give them access to counselors in the community who come there to run psychoeducational groups, and then they can choose someone they like to work with if they want to and have sessions with them in the community. So that's phase 1, and we're just working with adult males. So these are 18 to 28-year-olds for the most part. If they go into phase 2, it is now living in apartments, in a large apartment complex, and now they're implementing their plan that they created. So if they want to be working part-time, and most of them do, at least want to have part-time jobs, we'll help them with that. We'll help them prepare good resumes, coach them through that process of finding work. And many of them are academic dropouts, and they want a college degree. So they can go sign up for a course at the community college. They have access to a computer at our own computer lab, not in their apartments. They don't have smartphones to start with, although they can eventually try a smartphone later on if it's if they're doing well, and then we see how they do. And so it's really just a kind of a slow ramp up into adult life and into using computers again. And then eventually, and they often are in that program for anywhere from 3 to 12 months before they just are free to launch off on their own. So that's more or less how we do it.
Well, that's a very extensive description of what somebody could expect if they're dealing with some of these very complex issues. And I'm assuming insurance doesn't pay.
That is correct. As you know, as someone who works with folks with sex addiction, it's not yet officially recognized.
Right. And isn't that sad? And we are lobbying to make that different, but it's going to take some time. And what I always tell my clients is, it may seem like a big chunk of change, but at the same time, investing in oneself is the greatest investment they can make. And so truly, to be able to create a substantial, meaningful, love-producing life is what is most important, where relationships are first and foremost, and all the other stuff kind of comes second. Mm-hmm. And I just so appreciate the fact that you are the only center that really helps people with this, and you certainly have a good understanding of sexual addiction as well as gaming, and they oftentimes do go hand in hand. I know with some of the people that I've referred to you, they actually were involved in role-play fantasy gaming, Dungeons and Dragons and some of that stuff. Why do you think that's so popular?
Well, I think it's helpful to think in terms of sort of layers of reward. All games, and really all Internet activity just about, operates on that level of intermittent reinforcement, that unpredictability of reward. You take an action and you don't know if it's going to work or not work. It's the same principle at work in gambling. You take an action, is it going to get you a win or or not. So, and we, we're drawn in by that. It draws us deeper and deeper, and the more time we invest and the more energy or money we invest in any activity that is of that nature, it's harder and harder to pull out of it. So
well, and it sure does light that brain up, doesn't it? And
it really does.
The reward center up, yeah.
That's right. But then you add to it all of the social element that goes along with gaming. When you're playing those multiplayer online role-play games like World of Warcraft and many others, though there's the competitive element, which is rewarding, the cooperative element, which is rewarding, the ability to gain social recognition, status among your peers, the sense of community, of being important to these other people. Many of the gamers, all the guys who come to us pretty much are gamers with porn and other things thrown in. And, and they will say, my best friends are, online. They're the people I know from gaming. And so that social piece is just really lighting up the brain as well, and is very, very important to why they are so hooked on it.
Well, again, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise. Again, anybody who is interested in the program, they should go to, which website do you think would be the best for them to go to if they want to look at Restart?
At netaddictionrecovery.com.
Okay, netaddictionrecovery.com. And if you want to speak personally with Hilarie Cash, that would be HILARIE.CASH@restartlife.com. Hilarie, thank you so much for all this information. And, you give some very practical advice for parents to interrupt the cycle and promote good role modeling, good mental health, physical health, and social health. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that was Hilarie Cash. And again, she is helping parents in today's tough digital age with those limits and boundaries that are often so important for a parent to set. Parenting is trial and error, and it really can be difficult. And so the beautiful thing about the Internet is there's lots and lots and lots of information out there, and you have to decide what fits for you. And Hilarie's program is top-notch. All right, well, we are done for tonight. And, again, I highly recommend that you tune us in every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time so that we can be talking to the experts about sexual and love addiction, about gaming and gambling addiction, about abuse, eating disorders, thing that absolutely gets in the way of functioning that has an obsessive or a compulsive tendency to it. Next week, we're going to be talking with Kate Morgan, who's going to be talking about partners of sexual addiction. So stay tuned for that. And I just so appreciate you tuning in to me. If you have a question, you can email that at carolthecoach@aol.com. And as I end every show, I want you to live your best life. And to do that means there will only be one of you at all times. So fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.